Singing classical music will not allow you automatically to sing anything. It will help you. It's good to have the knowledge. I mean, you get a Kristen Chenoweth or people that can really sing everything, Kelly O'Hara, those kind of people. I mean, that's wonderful, wonderful singing, special ability, and you have to know the classical sound, the classical style, the classical repertoire versus the pop, the rock, the Broadway.
Hello and welcome to the Musician Toolkit. My name is David Lane. This is episode number 80. It is great to be with you once again, and I hope all of you are doing well today. So again, we're 80 episodes now into this podcast, and really just for the second time, we're going to be talking about the voice today. So back on episode 14, I had a conversation with Katie Mullenkamp, and that episode is called The Basics of Singing, and I definitely encourage you to check that out just to talk about the basics of singing, as the title says. Katie is a voice teacher, a singing teacher, and she happened to mention in that episode that there are two types of teachers. There are what we call voice teachers like herself, and then there are vocal coaches. Well, even though it's 66 episodes later, I am glad to finally talk to someone about vocal coaching. So you might be listening to this and you might be someone who is looking for a voice teacher or a voice coach, and you're not sure which type of instructor that you should have. So this episode, along with episode number 14, may provide some clarity. But also, you might have the skills necessary to consider being a vocal coach yourself. Well, I would be hard-pressed to think of someone I would rather talk to about being a vocal coach than my guest today, who is Bob Marks. Bob Marks has a career that goes back way more than 4 decades. He's spent more than 90,000 hours coaching singers. I want to give you a short list of some of the people that he's worked with before. In the original Broadway production of Annie, he coached Sarah Jessica Parker. He's also worked with Britney Spears, Ariana Grande, Bell Bundy, Lea Michele, Ashley Tisdale, Debbie Gibson, and, the list goes on and on. So in our conversation, one of the things I asked him is, how has he been able to attract such big names as students? What is it that he's teaching that makes him such a desirable teacher? And we're also going to talk some about his book. He has a book that is co-written with Elizabeth Gerby called Bob Marks' 88 Keys to Successful Singing Performances, Audition Advice from one of America's top vocal coaches. I've read the book, and it is a very good book, and I will have that in the show notes for you to check out yourself, which I'm sure you're going to want to do after you hear this conversation. I'm not sure that there's more I need to say before we get to the conversation, so let's go ahead and get to it. This is my conversation with Bob Marks. Bob, it is great to finally meet you. Thanks for joining my podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've listened to your podcasts for a long time.
Yeah, I think we first became connected that you were friends with one of my former guests, and you started listening. You gave me some feedback. You even introduced me to one of my guests on the podcast, Mr. Arnie Gross, and we've kind of, kept up with each other on Facebook and so forth, but it's great to finally meet you and chat with you about all things voice.
Well, thank you for having me. It's, I think your podcasts are very valuable to musicians and to teachers and people that care about the inner workings of the business.
Well, thank you so much for that. So, just kind of speaking of getting into the business, I think I want to just start with, sometimes I think, I imagine people might listen to this and they hear a guest and they're like, okay, well, who is this guest and what should I listen to? So I'm gonna go ahead and, you come across as a very humble guy, but I'm just going to read from the back of your book. Some of your clients include Britney Spears, Sarah Jessica Parker, Lea Michele, Ariana Grande, Nikki M. James, Laura Bell Bundy, Ashley Tisdale, and Debbie Gibson. And that's just what your book says. I think you've got a lot more than that. And so a lot of people across really several decades have come to you for vocal coaching. And I want to ask about vocal coaching in just a moment. We're going to do some clarification on that. But I want to start off with just kind of what I think would be a nice big question, and is, what is it that you think you have done, or what is one or two things that you have done to make yourself so desirable to so many big-time singers?
Well, I started a long time ago. I did my first musical direction job at 14. Mm-hmm. There was a local production of Damn Yankees, and my mother happened to work in a dancing school, and the dance teacher was playing Lola. And she said, we lost our musical director, pianist. And I got the job. I worked very cheap. I was in junior high school. And I really enjoyed working with singers. And some of the people in the show were in high school. They were auditioning for colleges. They were preparing songs for other things. And they asked me to accompany them and help them pick songs and help them arrange songs. And so by the time I was 16, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work with singers. My sister wanted voice lessons. I took her to a voice teacher in New York who asked me what I did. And I told her what I do, play the piano, pick songs, do the arrangements. She said, oh, you're a vocal coach. I said, I am? Like, I didn't know vocal coaching was a thing. And she said, yes, that's very much needed in this industry. I said, great. So I printed business cards and I became a vocal coach. And that was, everything just kind of melded together. I went to Queens College, and Ed Greenberg, who was a professor of theater there, got me involved in the St. Louis Muni Opera in Missouri. I was 21, and I was the associate conductor for a 50-piece orchestra and 150-foot wide stage, and it was an amazing, amazing experience, especially when you're that young.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, I started so young that I worked with Sarah Jessica Parker when she was 10. I worked with Britney Spears when she first came to New York to audition for Broadway shows. Lea Michele. So, I mean, all these people were starting out. And I was there for them because there were very few vocal coaches or voice teachers that knew how to work with young voices. And it's that, not that I had any specialized knowledge at the time, it's just that I wasn't afraid of them. I was closer to the age of the kids than I was to their parents. So, I'm 22 years old working with a 12-year-old, and, try it this way, try it this way. Eventually, I met a woman who was a speech therapist, and I'd never heard of that either. But I decided to go back to college and get a degree in speech and voice pathology, which was very helpful. I learned things about anatomy, physiology, acoustics, phonetics, things that I just didn't know I didn't know. And at that point, I was able to be much more valuable to singers, helping them maintain their vocal health, as well as working on their musical needs and their arrangements and preparing sheet music for the accompanist at auditions and all the other things that go along with it.
Great. So I guess the only thing that I would kind of like add to that, or I guess kind of a follow-up to that would be, so what do you think has kept students continuing to find you? Is it a referral network? Is it word of mouth? Is it is it a website? Like what do you think keeps feeding, new students into your studio over the years? Well,
I've kept the same studio for about 45 years. Mm-hmm. I finally closed the New York studio last year because after COVID, it was very hard to get people to actually physically come into Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't coming in a lot. It wasn't worth it. Plus, I was able to work so well online, assigning music, having a file of MP3s, a file of PDFs, and really do what I do anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. I just have to take time difference into account. But what kept them coming, I guess, was the fact that I did what I was supposed to do in a kind of non-threatening, supportive way. I like to think that that's what it was. I'm not saying these people stayed with me when they got famous.
Right.
I mean, it's not like I'm coaching Britney Spears every week.
Right.
It's a matter of just I was with them at the beginning, helped guide them, helped maybe open up their vision to maybe some different kinds of music, different styles of music, different vocal interpretations, and whatever they needed. Because every session is very, very specifically geared to the person I'm with. Sometimes people will ask, well, what would I expect to do at my first session? I said, I have no idea. I'll let you know. It might be career guidance. It might be preparing a song that they sent you to learn. It might be going through your material and seeing what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be fixed, and what needs to be tossed. I don't know yet. We'll find out. And I guess over the years I have provided what they needed. Also, they were mostly at that point, this is, I guess, the 70s and 80s, a lot of voice teachers were older people who grew up with opera. They didn't really understand rock, they didn't understand pop, they didn't understand contemporary Broadway music. So I was kind of this breath of fresh air. I was younger, I was not afraid of that kind of music. And also a lot of the voice teachers, they were trained as singers. They didn't play the piano. So they could play scales and exercises, but they couldn't accompany their students to prepare for auditions. So I tried to cover all those bases.
That kind of leads into the next big thing I want to talk about. So a lot of the talking points we have is, it's coming from your book, which I also see on the shelf behind you there as well.
Yeah.
Bob Mark's 88 Keys to Successful Singing Performances. Definitely want to include a link to this because we're not going to talk about even close to 88 in just a short amount of time.
Well, I wanted to keep the chapter short so that people could
Right.
read a chapter or two and then put it down and then read another chapter and maybe go around the book. They have an audition coming up, they have an interview coming up, and take what's interesting to them.
Oh yeah, not to imply that it's long, but I would say it would still take 2 or 3 hours to read it out loud. So, and we're going to talk about a few things in detail. So yeah, no problem. But I want to let me ask a question that the book answers, but I want to ask it from a different perspective. So your opening chapters, your opening section is like what the difference between a singing coach and a singing teacher. So we've had an episode where we kind of talked about that difference before. This is way back. Like, this is not me doing my homework. It's in the first dozen or so episodes with Kate.
Yep,
Kate
I heard
Mullenkamp.
that episode.
Right.
I heard that.
So
episode.
we did talk about that, and we'll elaborate on just a moment. But I'm going to say that you probably know if you have the skills that you need, or if you're working on the skills to become a vocal teacher, because you probably voice is your main instrument, and it's something that you have spent a lot of time dissecting and thinking about it. But maybe there might be listeners who could be a vocal coach in some capacity in a local area or on a bigger stage. So you kind of started already. You mentioned some piano skills, some knowledge of repertoire. What are some skills that you have developed that help you become a successful vocal coach?
I think the main thing that's kept me going all these years is that I'm not a singer. I don't want to be you. Right. I don't want to be my student. I don't think I could teach. I was a horrible piano teacher because I played the piano. I couldn't sit next to somebody who was just shouldn't be there. It just went against everything. I couldn't stand it. But listening to people sing gives me great joy because I don't sing. I can correct them. I started out doing musical direction. I did tons of dinner theaters in New Jersey. That's how I met my wife, as a matter of fact, years ago, playing piano. And this is before all the digital stuff was part of it. This is just playing the piano for everything from Hello Dolly to Hair to Dames at Sea to King and I. I mean, whatever it was, we did it: piano and drums, piano and bass, piano, bass and drums, whatever it needed, and it was all acoustic, and it was all live. And at one point, the producer said to me, "What if we record the music and perform to that?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't think anybody's tried that." So we went to a recording studio and recorded Shenandoah. He asked me how much time he should reserve to record. I said, "Well, the show is about 2.5 hours. It's probably at least 1.5 hours of music. So maybe 3 hours." Well, I think in 3 hours we got the overture done. We didn't get a lot done. I didn't realize how slow things move in a recording studio. And but then it started being recorded, and that became the de facto way they were doing musicals at that point. Actually, at one point I was sitting in the audience at the opening of a show I musical directed, and the tape recorder broke. And the director came up to me and said, can you play this on the piano? I said, I don't know. I never have, really. I made the recording, So I went. Luckily, I had the music in the trunk of my car, and I came back, and Guys and Dolls went up. What can I tell you? Of course, your original question has escaped me now.
So let me rephrase it a different way. So you're a vocal coach. You're not a vocal teacher.
Well, all right. And in the book, I think the conclusion is there's very little difference, because all teachers have to coach and all coaches have to teach.
Right.
It used to be I got most of my referrals from voice teachers.
Right.
Instead, I have the student, I'm working with skills and exercises and everything else, but I don't know what to give him for auditions. I don't know what to give him for performances. I don't know how to put together a club act. I don't know anything. So they would send them to me. And vice versa. If I got a student, I would send them to a technique teacher.
Right.
But the technique teachers gradually became former musical theater graduates of universities, once that became a thing. And they were doing the song picking too, so I was getting no more referrals from voice teachers. And also, if somebody was doing something vocally harmful, I felt I had an obligation to kind of help them and create exercises to get through that, maybe change the key, change the tempo, change the way they breathe, whatever it needed. And it looked like most voice teachers were not doing any more than that. As a matter of fact, most voice teachers that I was meeting were trained as singers, but didn't really understand how the voice is produced. They didn't go to school for it, and I did have a degree that gave me a lot of knowledge that I could impart. So instead of talking about, pretend there's a potato down your throat, or pretend there's a string coming out of your head, or whatever imagery they used, I was trying to make it a little more realistic and a little more down to earth and a little more understandable.
Okay. So it sounds like if you want to be, in 2024, if you want to be a vocal coach, you can't just know stuff about auditions, and how to prepare students for auditions. You have to have at least a basic understanding of vocal production and what it does. But what I was looking for is, if someone is seeking a vocal coach or seeking a voice teacher, what's maybe some examples of the type of instruction they could expect to get if they're working on preparing for an audition? What could they expect more from a vocal coach and maybe more from a vocal teacher?
Well, again, if they're preparing for a specific audition where they were sent music to learn, which happens now much more frequently than it doesn't, because it's so easy to attach a PDF file to an email. I mean, 30 years ago, you didn't have that, and then once faxes came along, if you could duplicate the fax and people could get to your office if you're an agent and pick up the fax, it became a whole other ballgame. We would both try to teach the singer how to perform the music they sent. If it's an audition where they have to sing their own songs, we have to go through their songs with the knowledge of what they are, with the knowledge of the show they're auditioning for, or at least the style of it, so we know what to prepare. You don't prepare the same thing for a Grease audition as you do for a Showboat audition. So it's a matter of knowing the style, knowing what role you're going for, because a lot of shows have very specific tracks. So if you are going for Adelaide in Guys and Dolls, it's going to be very different material than if you're going for Sarah Brown in Guys and Dolls. So it's a matter of knowing whether it's the legit soprano voice or the more resonant, belty chest voice. And as far as students coming to prepare for it, I would want to warm them up, get an idea of how healthy their voice is. If I don't know them, that will also give me an idea of their range. It'll give me an idea of their passaggio, where they're going to switch into head, where they're going to go into chest, how strong their voice is at different ranges on the piano. But every lesson, like I said, is different. I sometimes equate it to going to a therapist. If you go to a psychotherapist and say, I'm having marital problems, well, how are you going to treat that? There's not one way to treat it, except you want to get a background, you want to get to know the person, you want to get to know the other person as best you can, and you want to come up with solutions that work. And the same with vocal coaching. We try to come up with solutions that will get you through auditions, whether it's negotiating your music with a strange accompanist, which is a whole other ballgame. It's like doing a partner dance with somebody you've never met before. This person is really important to your audition, and if your music is not clearly marked, sometimes I'll see it as still. They'll write voice or start.
Right.
Well, what's the intro? I make that clear when I give workshops. I do workshops and master classes all over. Is it a bell tone? Is it an arpeggio? Is it 2 bars? Is it 4 bars? Is it a vamp? There's a lot of possibilities. And it doesn't as much matter what choice you make, but you have to know what to expect because it's your audition. So you have to know, what am I going to hear from the piano? Well, if you don't tell the accompanist what to play, you have no idea what you're going to hear.
Right. It actually, I think the episode where you became, you kind of a listener in Life in the Pit was my interview with Jose Simbulan. And,
yes.
He's...
That could have been. It was early on, right?
Yeah, he's a really nationally renowned piano accompanist, especially for auditions. He does quite a bit. And I think the thing that stood out the most from that interview with him was, some advice that he gave, for actors and actresses who are about to go to an audition. And it was that when you go to an audition, that should not be the first time you have heard a live accompanist play what you've prepared.
Absolutely, absolutely. Nor should it be the first time you're going to sing the song that day.
Right.
I think no matter what, just go through it at home, go through it with an accompanist preferably, go through it with your teacher, but just get it under your belt.
Yeah. Nice.
But yeah, Jose has a lot of valuable advice, and the school he's teaching at now is very lucky to have somebody with real world experience.
Yes. So again, we're not going to talk too much about the book, but there's just a couple of things that I thought I wanted to highlight. But before I get to this one section, I did write down just a 2-word phrase that I got from your book, and you mentioned it. You kind of mentioned it just a moment ago, and that was realistic goals. That's one of the things you talk about, and you talked about how that's your kind of your philosophy when it comes to teaching. With the voice is realistic. Could you elaborate on that? What do you think some things people might expect otherwise, and what is it that you're trying to do differently as far as realistic goals?
Well, I think realistic goals can be vocal goals, they can be career goals, they can be financial goals. It doesn't matter which ones. I try to be encouraging but realistic. Somebody comes in, they don't live in New York, they don't live near New York, they've never been in a show, sometimes they've never seen a show, but they want to be on Broadway. And I don't want to say, well, forget that, that's just not going to happen.
Right.
Because I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Everything, it's been there. I had a girl come to me. She didn't look anything like anybody that could ever be on Broadway. And she sang adequately. She was in Phantom of the Opera within a month on Broadway. So there's a role apparently that sings a little bit of Angel of Music, and that's it. It's a dance role. So I don't know. It happens. So I try to be encouraging but realistic and say, well, let's learn songs that are right for your personality, for your voice, and for the kind of things you're doing now. And let's try to get you bigger parts in your regional theater, or if it's school, or if it's any other place. And then let's be ready for Broadway if it happens. Yeah. So I'm never going to say, forget it. So many people come to me and they said, well, 20 years ago, my teacher said I could never make it professionally, so I just gave it up. And that's so sad.
Yeah.
If I went to a barber and said I just want more hair, he's going to go, not going to happen. So it's the same with singing in a way, except it can happen. So I believe in being ready. And if it makes you feel good and you enjoy singing, then you should sing. A lot of teachers would say, I'm not going to work with students who are prepubescent. They're not ready to sing. They have to be at least 18 years old, blah, blah, blah. So, but they're going to sing anyway. I was playing the piano for Annie on Broadway for a long time, through the kindness of Arnie Gross, by the way. And I would hear these kids sometimes doing great damage to their voices because they weren't breathing, they weren't taking care of their voices. And I said to other teachers, I said, well, they're going to sing, they're going to audition. Why not have them do it in a healthy way? Why not have them sing songs that make sense for them to sing? So why not have songs in keys that they can negotiate instead of trying to reach notes that they can't? So I'm realistic, but I try to stay encouraging.
Yeah, I feel like the people who understand this best are probably, people who do any kind of exercise or athletes. It's like you always have the person who, says, I'm going to run a half marathon, but they never run at all. So it's like, why don't we try walking for a long time, and then let's try running for 30 seconds and then walking for 2 minutes, and then kind of building up some stamina, and so forth.
Well, I think it's more, it's just as much the person that says, I'm going to run a marathon. You say, run a half marathon first. Let's go. Let's take smaller bites here. Can you get around the block? Yes, absolutely.
Exactly.
I tried to run for a couple of days once.
Yeah.
It didn't end. I was in an orchestra doing a show, and by the third day I couldn't get into the pit. My legs wouldn't work. It was just I was not cut out for running.
I find a lot of wisdom, a lot of insight into being a musician from other subjects. And, one thing, that you just said kind of harmonizes with one of the books that I recommend, and I think I've even mentioned it before on this podcast, is called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. And it's just a mindset shift. It's like you remove the words always and never, because you can't, if you say that always happens or that never happens, you're always wrong and never wrong, basically. Right. pretty much. But it's you also kind of learn how statistics work and percentages work, and even if you say something like you have a 20% chance of success, it's like, well, that's you can say, well, that's an 80% chance of not succeeding, but it also means in 1 out of every 5 opportunities that are similar, you could have success. So it's just kind of a different way of thinking. So to me, a realistic goal, while being encouraging, is not necessarily saying you have to be in these 80-90+% chances of success, but getting that close to the 50% is possible, where you could fail. But with a lot of hard work and the right opportunity, you could succeed.
Well, it's also looking at it in a way. Now, one way of looking at it, let's say you have a 50% chance of succeeding. Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't succeed, you have failed.
Right.
You have failed, whether it's 1%, 10%, or 50%, doesn't matter. You failed. Or you can say, well, I made it to the top 50. Maybe next time I'll make it to the top 30.
Yeah.
You go to an audition. It's between me and 3 other guys.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now I'm one of 4.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe next time I'll be one of 2. Maybe next time I'll get it.
Yeah.
And I do tell my students, and this is a hard one. They don't always like to hear it. Most auditions you go to, you will not succeed at. You will not get the part. It just numeric. Most times you buy a lottery ticket, you're not going to win the lottery. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
But every audition you go to builds you as a performer, as a human being. You learn how to negotiate the room, the casting director, the accompanist. You just learn things, and you get a lot more self-assured for the next audition. So even if you don't get the part, you're building up equity in becoming a professional.
I'm always fascinated in different mindsets. I feel like for me, and just knowing who I am, if I were a professional actor or trying to become one, I think I would almost have to have the mindset, I'm going to do all these auditions and expect that I won't get it. But then I hear other people say that comes across, and it's helpful if you go in expecting to get it. But then you have to have a way of coping when, as you say, most of the time you won't. So it's a balancing act that I find intriguing.
Well, it's also not a bad idea to go to an audition saying, I'm going to have an opportunity to sing for people, and that's what I love doing. I love singing for people. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to experience a new accompanist. I'm going to experience a new room, new people. I'm going to sing. I'm going to do my best. And even if I don't get this job, the casting director might remember me for another job. And it's happened so many times. Somebody goes in to sing for a casting director for one show, and they say, I'm sorry, you're not right for this show, but you're right for another show. And that's it happens because casting directors don't just cast one thing. So there's always something, and there's always a positive way of looking at it. Thank you for the opportunity to sing for you.
Yeah.
And that's it. If you go in going, I know I'm not going to get this, it's okay, then yes, you don't want to go in with a bad attitude. Any more than you would on a first date.
Exactly.
I also acquainted as a date. As a first date, you don't know how it's going to go. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know what you're going to say, and you can't really rehearse it. You just have to go with the flow. And the more you can go with the flow at an audition, the better off you'll be.
Right.
If you're standing there ready to sing your up-tempo, and they say, I see you tap dance. You can't let that get you go, oh my God, wait, I'm ready to sing here. I have to answer a question. Mm-hmm. Say, okay, what are you going to sing? And you tell them, do you have something else? You have to be the willow tree. You have to be able to bend and go with the flow.
Yeah.
Because that's what the audition is also. How flexible are you? You know that in a rehearsal period, you have to be flexible. The director said, enter stage left, enter stage left. Enter stage right. You go, I can't do that. So you have to be flexible and learn how to go with the flow.
Excellent. So let's highlight one section of your book. I thought it'd be interesting. So this is a section called misconceptions, and so there are 4 phrases that I think a lot of actors have heard people say, with good intentions, and you have some different thoughts on it. So let's start with the first one. It's sing from your diaphragm. So talk about that.
I think I write in the book that you can't sing from your diaphragm. It's just not, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
But there are teachers that teach that. Mm-hmm. And singers will come in, they go, yes, I have to breathe through my diaphragm. I said, the diaphragm is not it's not something you can sing through. You have to utilize it, for support, but it's not the kind of thing you can sing through. You have one set of vocal cords, one set of lungs, one set of nostrils, and one mouth. Now we have to make them coordinate and work.
Nice. The next misconception is to fill in the blank about your singing, you need more air.
That happens. Yeah. Every once in a while, I will get a student who will only inhale through the nose. Mm-hmm. And they say, by the way, I notice you're only breathing through your nose. Oh, that's the way you have to breathe. I go, really? Why? Well, that's what my teacher said, you breathe in through your nose. I said, well, what if you have a cold? I said, well, I don't know. So I said, let's try breathing through your mouth.
Right.
He said, really? I could do that? I go, yeah, it's a bigger hole. And usually they go, oh, that was so much easier, so much better. Well, imagine how much more air you're getting from your mouth than your nose.
Mm-hmm.
And they say all kinds of things. Head voice doesn't come from your head really, any
Right.
more than any other voice. There are a lot of misconceptions. And like I said earlier, the potato in the throat or the string holding you up like a marionette. There are all kinds of images teachers use, hoping or believing it will enlighten the student to do the right thing. But sometimes just the facts help.
Right. The next misconception is the phrase "you need to open your mouth more." So let's answer that in a different way. Obviously, that's a misconception. What are some instances where you would open your mouth less, or you would solve your problem in a different way?
Opening your mouth more is not necessarily a misconception unless it's given to you as the key to singing.
Right.
It's not just a matter of how wide your mouth is open.
Right.
But certainly if you're singing a diphthong and you're holding the E and you could do like E and just get more sound just by relaxing the jaw. Don't forget jaw tension is a big thing too. Mm-hmm. So if you can get the tongue down, the jaw relaxed, the mouth a little more open, that will do a lot to make your sound a little more full and rich.
Great.
Is that what I wrote in the book? I hope I did. Something like that?
I think so. Is it now?
Okay, good. I'll have to read this book one day again. It's been
I need to reread it. I read it last year, so it's like I went back through and I kind of wrote down some thoughts, just some here and there. But I mean, you probably did. You wrote a lot of good things in the book.
Well, I did. We were working on this book for years.
Yeah.
But it was on and off. And then with the pandemic, it was like, well, may as well get this thing going. And as a matter of fact, I'm doing a seminar, an all-day musical theater seminar at Schenectady, SUNY Schenectady, State University of New York, with my co-author, with Liz Gerby.
Nice.
So that'll be interesting. We haven't really taught together yet, so it'll be fun.
So let's go over one other misconception, and you kind of hinted at this earlier, and that is the phrase, you should start with the study of classical music, which will prepare you for all types of singing. Yeah,
I hope less and less people believe that now. Mm-hmm. I mean, I nothing against classical music, nothing against classical singing, but it is one style of singing. It's not the be-it, end-all. It's not like ballet may be the root of all dance because you have to know the positions. It's a very different sound, a different placement, a different... singing classical music will not allow you automatically to sing anything. It will help you. It's good to have the knowledge. I mean, you get a Kristen Chenoweth or people that can really sing everything, Kelly O'Hara, those kind of people. I mean, that's wonderful, wonderful singing, special ability, and you have to know the classical sound, the classical style, the classical repertoire versus the pop, the rock, the Broadway. So, yeah, that used to be more when the teachers were retired opera singers. Since all they knew was classical music, they had to tell you that that's what you have to learn. Back then, when I went to Queens College, which was my first college, and I was a music major, there was no contemporary music. There was jazz and there was classical. That was the only music you were offered. I said, well, this is a long time ago, what about Burt Bacharach? What about pop music? What about Broadway music? Oh, no, that's something you can do with the classical knowledge. And then about a year and a half into it, I had spent most of my time in the drama department because I played the piano for all the classes and the workshops for the musical theater program. That's what I loved. And I said, I don't need this anymore. And years later, I went back to college for the speech and voice pathology, which was a lot more helpful to me. In retrospect, I kind of wish I had stuck out the music. I wish I had stuck out more of the ear training, the harmony, the orchestrations, the analysis, the stuff I don't really concentrate on because I'm sure it would be valuable.
Yeah.
But you make choices in the world.
Exactly. Yeah. I was just thinking, my vocal knowledge came from primarily probably the 3 hours or so per week in college that I was in voice lessons, but not a single one of them was as a voice student. It was as the accompanist listening to, teachers working with other students. And, you start to think, well, I'm listening, I'm observing, so I'm picking up quite a bit. But it was when I finally had a voice lesson as a student, as an adult, the teacher gave me something that was like very challenging right off the bat. I had always thought about how you have to like round the tone and make everything so pleasant and beautiful. And the first thing he tried to get me to do was sing what I think sounds ugly. Basically sing something that, get rid of that prettiness so that I could explore a different side, that you might do if you're singing a rock, hard rock tune, or, you're belting, or, a loud musical theater piece. And, that was quite an experience, just kind of, first of all, getting used to the way that sounds and the way that feels. There's so much to the voice, and sometimes we fall in love with certain types of voices as a listener, and just, we forget just how much variety there is and how much there is to learn about it.
Did you enjoy accompanying singers?
Oh, I did. Yeah. My caveat to that, and I've kind of hinted on this on the podcast a few times before, I enjoyed it once I became a reasonable sight reader. When I was thrown into the fire as a freshman, I didn't realize how underdeveloped my sight reading skills were, and that was something that I realized I had to improve fairly quickly. And I feel like that was like a big priority my freshman and half of my sophomore years, just getting my sight reading up to what I would consider an expected level. And then I was able to improve it, so I'm sure I am not on the level of like Jose or, some of these other people who have basically exercised that muscle so much. But I think I'm better than average, but it's something that I've worked quite a bit towards.
Well, also nowadays, piano parts have grown much more difficult. I mean, when I was starting out, there was no Jason Robert Brown or Stephen Sondheim shows or Adam Gettle shows or anything like that. You didn't have a light in the piazza. You didn't have, I was in high school when they did company. And the first time I had to play that for my college, we were doing company in college, and trying to master the keyboard part of another 100 people or those kind of things was an eye-opener. It was like, my Lerner and Lowe, Frank Lesser, Rodgers and Hammerstein knowledge was not going to really help me here. I had to really see what was on the page and try to put something in my fingers.
Yeah. My experience as an accompanist, I would say, is yes, the people that you mentioned contemporary, like Jason Robert Brown and Adam Gettle, and I'd throw Stephen Sondheim, on that list, just kind of, let's just say, since the 90s onward, 80s and 90s onward, very difficult to play. But there's a lot of other kind of more modern musicals, especially kind of more of your pop style musicals, that I find pretty easy to play by comparison, that are also coming out. Like, you think, a lot of like your Alan Menken, your Disney type music, is, I find a little bit more straightforward, a little bit easier to pick up. Now, back in like the heyday, like in the 60s and 70s, I don't know if there's anything quite as difficult as Jason Robert Brown. But I find like some of the was it like She Loves Me, like Jerry Bach,
Bach
like
and Harnick, yeah,
and and some of the things I've seen in like Lerner and Lowe, like there's some challenging aspects to a lot of that music that especially like when I'm playing it, I think a lot of it is like, oh, I didn't expect that chord, or that rhythm.
Right. But I for some reason I guess I grew up with that kind of music. I got where it was going,
Right.
and also the music allowed you to play something that sounded good with the singer. The piano part was not usually intrinsic to the song.
Right.
It was it you could play chords if it was a ballad. You could just Vanilla Ice Cream you could get through if you knew what chords were coming up. But now you get these things like you look at Dear Evan Hansen, you look at some of the shows now that are very complex, and the piano is an integral part of the piece.
Yeah.
You can't just fake your way through that. You have to actually play what's there.
Well, there's so much we could talk about. I'm going to go ahead and let's just kind of wrap this up here. Again, the book is Bob Marks' 88 Keys to Successful Singing Performances. Audition advice from one of of America's top vocal coaches by Bob Marks and Elizabeth. Is it Gerby?
Gerby.
Elizabeth Gerby.
Yep.
So this
I don't
book.
know if you got the new copy with where it's Dr. Elizabeth Gerby.
Oh, nice. Nice.
She actually got her doctorate at Columbia, and she's now a doctor of musical theater.
Oh, excellent. So, yeah, I will put a link to that book in the show notes. And what else would you like to share, like where people can find out more about you or follow you or, anything you have going on?
After I was unable to get Bob Marks at AOL.com, I decided I better get Bob Marks quickly. So you can find me pretty much anywhere because it's Bob Marks at Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, X, bobmarks.com. I'm all over the place. I'm really easy to find. And if you have any questions or ideas, sure, get in touch with me. I'm especially now that I'm working mostly online, I'm happy to spend the time. Also, the book now, lately, comes in hardcover.
Nice.
Suitable for gifts.
Great.
I don't know if anybody's bought one in hardcover, but it is there. And I hope you find the book useful. It's my experience and Liz's experience, and we just started the book with everything I had ever written, every tweet of advice, every article for the Journal of Voice or whatever I've written, tapes of my workshops, and we kind of organized it from there and fleshed it out, and here we are. But I still love really working one-on-one, especially online, because it just makes it so convenient. I mean, I'm going to Thailand Friday morning, virtually, because it's 11 hours later there.
Right.
So, but it works out. Whether it's California, Thailand, or Florida, whatever time zone you're in, I'm here.
Nice.
But you're a real pleasure to talk to, and your knowledge, of course, means that you can ask questions that are actually logical, appropriate, and probing. So, because you've been there.
Well, not quite to the degree that you have, and especially in your area. So I appreciate you sharing your expertise, and definitely encourage people to read more about what we talked today.
Well, I appreciate it, and it was a real pleasure.
And that's going to wrap up episode number 80. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be very grateful if you would share it either on social media or in an email or in a text, just to your friends or to someone that you know that would really enjoy listening to this. Also, as I mentioned several times, do check out the link in the show notes for Bob's book. I do highly recommend adding that to your library. If you have any thoughts on this episode, if you'd like to reach out in any way, you can let me know through a voicemail at speakpipe.com/musician toolkit, or you can go to davidlanemusic.com where you'll find a contact form, and you can also find all of my socials there where I and this podcast reside. Or if you want to cut right to the chase, go to Instagram at David Lane Music or Facebook at David M. Lane Music. Again, that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.